There's something that happens in groups, something nobody talks about openly. And it's so subtle, so perfectly disguised, that the person it's happening to usually ends up believing it's their fault. You were surrounded. You didn't even see the walls going up. And by the time you realized you were being pushed out, you were already gone. But here's the part nobody expected. The truth has a way of surfacing. Let me paint you a picture. Imagine you're sitting at a table. Could be a work meeting, a family dinner, a friend group chat, doesn't matter, and something feels off. Not dramatically off. Not movie villain off. Just slightly wrong. Like a picture hanging crooked on the wall. Nobody else seems to notice. Or maybe they do notice and they're pretending not to. You speak up about something. Maybe you raise a concern. Maybe you have a different opinion. Maybe you simply exist in a way that makes someone uncomfortable. And suddenly, not all at once, but gradually, the temperature around you drops. People get quieter when you walk in. Conversations shift. You stop getting invited to things. Your ideas get ignored. Then 5 minutes later, someone else says the same thing and everyone loves it. And here's the cruelest part of this whole thing. They make you feel like you're imagining it. That right there is what we're talking about today. Not just the experience of being pushed out of a group, but the specific, calculated, socially sophisticated way a group of people can collectively decide that you need to go, and then make you feel like you chose to leave. This video is for every single person who has sat with that confusion, who has questioned their own memory, who has shrunk themselves trying to fit back in, who eventually removed themselves, not because they wanted to, but because staying had become unbearable. And most importantly, this is for the people who are now watching the truth come to light. Because it does. It always does. So let me give you some context here, because I think a lot of people experience what I just described, but they don't have the language for it. And when you don't have language for something, it's really hard to process it. It just becomes this fog you carry around. What we're really talking about has several layers to it. There's a phenomenon that psychologists and social researchers have studied for decades, the idea of social exclusion as a form of control. And it is remarkably effective. You know why? Because human beings are wired at a biological level to need belonging. This isn't a personality weakness. This isn't being needy or sensitive. This is evolution. For hundreds of thousands of years, being cast out of a group meant death. Your nervous system doesn't know the difference between ancient tribal exile and a modern friend group quietly icing you out. So when it starts happening, when you start picking up on the signals that you're being pushed to the margins, your brain goes into something like a survival panic. And that panic doesn't always look like crying or anger. Sometimes it looks like people-pleasing. Sometimes it looks like shrinking. Sometimes it looks like you trying desperately to figure out what you did wrong so you can fix it. And the group? They're watching that. Whether they're consciously aware of it or not, they see the effect their behavior is having. And it either makes them feel powerful or it makes them feel justified, as in, see, there's something off about this person. Here's where it gets even more fascinating and honestly kind of disturbing. Research done at places like Purdue University and later expanded on by social psychologists like Kipling Williams shows that when people are ostracized, even briefly, even in a harmless lab experiment, their brain registers it in the same region that processes physical pain. The anterior cingulate cortex. The same place that lights up when you stub your toe or burn your hand. So let's be clear. What some groups do to individuals. It hurts. Literally. Not metaphorically. Literally. But okay, here's where it gets interesting. Because there's a specific type of social exclusion that I want to talk about today. The kind that isn't one bully. The kind that isn't one bad relationship. The kind where it's a collective, a group, where multiple people seem to have aligned, sometimes without even needing a conversation about it, and decided together that you are the problem. And I want to break down exactly how that happens, why it's so hard to identify in real time, and then, because this is the part that matters, why those situations have a tendency to unravel. So let's get into the mechanics of this. How does a group decide, collectively, to turn on someone? Here's what I find so fascinating about this. It almost never starts with a meeting. Nobody sends out a memo. There's no group chat titled, "Let's get rid of Sarah." It's almost always organic, or at least it looks that way. It usually starts with one person, There's almost always a nucleus, someone with social capital in the group. Maybe they're the most charismatic. Maybe they're the most feared. Maybe they're the one who's been there the longest and established the unspoken rules. This person, for whatever reason, decides that you are a threat. Or you're inconvenient. Or you've seen something they didn't want seen. Or you just don't fit the story they want to tell about the group. And here's the move, and this is subtle, so pay attention, they don't attack you outright. That would be too obvious. Instead, they plant seeds. A casual comment here. A raised eyebrow there. Did you notice how so-and-so always does that thing? In a conversation you weren't part of, they start building a narrative about you. And because humans are social creatures who trust the people they're close to, the other members of the group start trying on that narrative. They start looking at you through that lens. And once you're looking at someone through a specific lens, once you've been told to see them as difficult or unstable or a troublemaker or too sensitive or whatever the story is, you start finding evidence for that story everywhere. It's called confirmation bias, and it is a group's most powerful unconscious weapon. So now you've got 3 people, 4 people, 5 people, all quietly accumulating their own little file of reasons to see you negatively. And none of them realize they've been nudged into this position. They think they came to this conclusion themselves. Here's the analogy I want you to hold on to. Have you ever watched a documentary about how wildfires spread? You've got one spark, that's the nucleus person I mentioned. And then the conditions have to be right, dry environment, a little wind, those are the group dynamics. And then the fire doesn't burn everything at once. Catches on one tree, then spreads, then catches on another. And by the time it's really moving, it's hard to even identify where it started. That's what social ostracism in a group looks like from the outside. What it looks like from your position is smoke. You smell something wrong, but you can't see the fire. You can't find the source. And everyone around you is telling you the air smells perfectly fine. Now, the behavior of the group toward you starts shifting. And I want to describe this really specifically because a lot of you are going to recognize this. They stop including you in small moments. Not the big events, no, those might still happen for a while. It's the small ones. The spontaneous coffee run where everyone else gets asked and you don't. The inside joke that forms when you're in the room but that somehow doesn't include you. The moment someone shares exciting news and does a scan of the room and their eyes just skip past you. You feel it, but you can't prove it. And this is the part that really gets me, when you react to it, when you ask what's going on, or when you pull back because you're hurting, that becomes the evidence against you. Oh, she's being so sensitive. He's always making things awkward. There they go again. Your response to being hurt becomes the justification for hurting you. I don't know if you caught that, but that's worth sitting with. Your pain becomes their proof. So you leave, or technically you remove yourself, because you didn't get formally kicked out, right? There was no confrontation. Nobody said, "You're not welcome here anymore." What happened was, existing in that space became so exhausting, so quietly painful, so fundamentally lonely despite being surrounded by people, that you made the decision to step back. And here's the devastating thing about that. To the outside world, and often to the group itself, it looks like you walked away. It looks like you chose this. And some of them will actually use this as further evidence that something was wrong with you. See? They couldn't handle being here. They bailed. But you and I know the truth about what really happened. You didn't leave because you're weak. You left because staying was costing you something that money can't buy back, your sense of self. When you're in a group that has collectively decided you're the problem, something happens to you psychologically that is really hard to describe until you've lived it. You start to shrink. Not physically, obviously, but your presence shrinks. You start pre-editing everything you say before you say it. You second-guess your reactions. You perform this exhausting emotional calculus every single moment. Is this okay? Is this too much? Will this set something off? And that performance? It's not sustainable. Nobody can maintain that indefinitely. There's this concept in psychology sometimes called identity erosion, and it's pretty much exactly what it sounds like. When you're in an environment that consistently reflects back to you a version of yourself that doesn't match who you actually are, when the mirror the group holds up shows you a distorted image, you start to lose grip on the real thing. You start to wonder, maybe they're right. Maybe I am the problem. This is the most insidious part of the whole dynamic. Because the group doesn't have to say anything overtly cruel. They don't have to yell. They don't have to be monsters. All they have to do is consistently, quietly, collectively confirm that distorted image, and your own brain will do the rest of the work. So you leave. You step back. You go quiet. You stop showing up. And there's grief in that, by the way. Real grief. Even if the group wasn't good for you, even if you can look back now and see clearly that you were never going to be safe there, there's still grief. Because you had hope. You believed in what it could have been. You invested. And that investment doesn't just disappear because the situation turned out badly. But here's what I need you to hear, and I need you to really let this land. The fact that you removed yourself, that was an act of self-preservation, not weakness. An animal caught in a trap that chews through its own leg to escape isn't weak. It's choosing survival. What you did was choose survival. You chose your peace over the performance. You chose reality over a version of belonging that was costing you everything. That took more strength than staying ever would have. Okay, now here's where the story takes a turn. Because I've been talking about what was, the past, the pattern, what happened to you. But this isn't just about what happened. It's about what's happening now. Someone is seeing the truth. And I want to talk about why this almost always happens. Not always quickly, not always loudly, but it happens. Here's the thing about groups that operate by pushing someone out. They're usually not done after you. Think about that. The dynamic that made it possible to turn on you, that dynamic doesn't evaporate when you leave. If anything, it intensifies. Because now the group has a successful template. They know how to do this. They've done it. And the nucleus, that original person I was talking about, they haven't resolved whatever internal thing drove them to need a target. So eventually they need another one. And here's when the people who participated in your exclusion start to experience something uncomfortable: recognition. They watch the machine turn toward someone else. And maybe for the first time, they see the mechanics of it from the outside. They see how a narrative gets built. How an eyebrow raise becomes a story, becomes a consensus. And something in them shifts. A quiet, inconvenient thought surfaces. Wait, is this what happened to them? And that thought is the beginning of the truth coming out. Now, this doesn't always look like a dramatic confession. It doesn't always look like someone coming to you with a full apology and a changed perspective. Sometimes it's subtler. Sometimes it's someone quietly reaching back out to you. Sometimes it's someone who was in that group saying something like, "I think I didn't handle things well back then." Sometimes it's just, they know. They know and they carry it. But I've watched this happen enough times, heard enough stories, read enough accounts, and there is a pattern here that is almost mathematical in its reliability. Groups that operate through the social exclusion and scapegoating of individuals tend to eventually fracture. Because the behavior that drove you out doesn't stay hidden forever. It either turns inward, the group starts consuming itself, or external pressure makes the truth visible. Here's a real-world parallel I think about a lot. You know how in science there's this idea called a tracer? In medicine, doctors sometimes inject a radioactive tracer into a patient to track blood flow, to see where the problem is. The tracer follows the path of least resistance and eventually reveals the blockage or the issue. Your absence? In some groups, your absence becomes a tracer. The problem they were so desperate to eliminate, it doesn't leave when you do. It was never actually about you. So after you're gone, it shows itself in other ways. Other conflicts arise. Other people get pushed to the edges. And slowly, the pattern becomes undeniable. Someone starts to see it. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. I want to go deeper here because I think there's something really important that gets missed when we talk about these dynamics. We tend to frame this as a story of villains and victims. And look, I'm not going to stand here and pretend that what some groups do to individuals isn't harmful. It is. But I think if we stop at "they were bad, you were good," we miss something more interesting and more useful. Why do groups do this in the first place? The honest answer is fear. Not always conscious fear. Not always a fear that the people involved could even name if you ask them. But almost always, when a group turns on an individual, it's because that individual represents something the group doesn't know how to handle. Sometimes it's because you're different in a way that challenges the group's identity. Sometimes it's because you have an ability or a quality that someone in the group finds threatening. Sometimes it's because you can see through the performance, you can see the cracks in the version of reality the group has agreed to maintain, and that makes you dangerous to the whole structure. Have you ever been in a room full of people who are all agreeing with something that you know isn't quite right? And everyone seems comfortable. Everyone seems happy with the agreement. And you say something, maybe not even confrontationally, maybe just a quiet observation, and the room goes cold? That's the moment. That's the moment where the group makes a calculation, consciously or not. This person is a threat to our comfort, our consensus, our story, and groups, like ecosystems, tend to self-correct toward stability. Even if that stability is built on something false. Even if maintaining it requires pushing someone out. Because the short-term discomfort of excluding you is less, in the group's calculation, than the long-term discomfort of having to examine themselves. What this means for you is that being pushed out of a group that operates this way is not evidence of your failure. It's evidence of your function. You did exactly what you were supposed to do as a clear-sighted, authentic person. The problem was never your presence. The problem was their inability to tolerate your presence. There's a thought I keep coming back to. A candle doesn't threaten other candles by shining. But in a room that's decided it prefers the dark, a candle becomes the enemy. You were the candle. Now here's the part that I think is really important about the now, about someone seeing the truth. When the truth surfaces about a group dynamic like this, it creates a really interesting ripple effect. Because suddenly the narrative that was built to justify your exclusion starts to crack. And when a narrative cracks, people start revisiting their memories of you through a cleaner lens. Things that were interpreted as flaws get reinterpreted as strengths. That directness that was called aggressive gets recognized as honesty. That independence that was called distant gets recognized as self-possession. That clarity that was called difficult gets recognized as integrity. You don't change, but the lens changes. Let me tell you about someone. I'm going to change some details because this isn't my story to tell fully, but the essence of it is real. There was a person, let's call her Maya, who had been part of a close-knit professional group for several years. She was talented, observant, and she had this quality that some people find magnetic and others find unsettling. She saw things clearly. When something wasn't working, she'd say so. When someone was off in their thinking, she'd gently push back. She wasn't unkind about it. She wasn't aggressive. She was just present in a way that made it hard to coast on half-truths. Over time, she started noticing the shift. The meetings where her contributions got less airtime. The team lunches where nobody mentioned it to her until the last minute. The way her ideas would fall flat and then show up in someone else's proposal the following week. She did what a lot of us do. She tried harder. She second-guessed herself. She read everything she could about being a better communicator, a better collaborator. She genuinely believed that if she could just figure out what she was doing wrong, she could fix it. She couldn't fix it, because she was never actually broken. Eventually, she left. Not dramatically. She just got quiet, and then she got gone. And the story the group told afterward was that she was difficult and couldn't handle collaboration. And didn't everyone feel so much better now? They did feel better. For a little while. Then, about a year later, one of the members of that group, someone who had been relatively central to it, made a mistake. A real one. Public one. And the machine turned. And as this person felt those wheels turning toward them, felt the freeze, felt the narrative being built, felt the room temperature drop, they had this moment of visceral recognition. Oh, they thought, oh, this is what we did to Maya. That person reached out to Maya. Took them 3 attempts to even find the right words. The first message they sent was deleted. The second was too full of excuses. The third one finally just said, I think I understood something recently that I didn't understand before. I'm sorry. Maya didn't immediately trust it. Of course she didn't. You don't just open a door that was once slammed in your face without checking the hinges first. But that message, that moment of someone seeing the truth, meant something to her. Not because it changed the past, but because it confirmed what she'd always known. She had been right. And that's what I want to say to you right now, as directly as I can. You were right. Whatever you saw, That slight wrongness, that crooked picture on the wall, you weren't imagining it. Your gut was giving you accurate information. The discomfort you felt wasn't a flaw in your system. It was your system working. It was your instincts doing their job. And the fact that the group collectively decided that your perception was the problem, that's not evidence that you were wrong. That's actually one of the clearest signs that you were right. Groups don't typically go to elaborate lengths to dismiss someone's perception if that perception is inaccurate and harmless. You only need to build a case against someone's reality if their reality poses a threat to yours. Now, and I want to be careful here, because I'm not interested in feeding ego or self-righteousness. Being right doesn't mean you're perfect. It doesn't mean you handled everything perfectly. It doesn't mean the group had no legitimate grievances at all. We're human. We all have blind spots. We all have moments where we could have done better. But here's the distinction. Having flaws and being deserving of collective social elimination are not the same thing. They are nowhere near the same thing. What happened to you went far beyond accountability. It was a group protecting itself at your expense, using your presence as a lightning rod for their discomfort. And then, when the lightning rod was removed, discovering that the storm was inside them all along. You were right to trust yourself enough to leave. You were right to choose your sanity over their validation. You were right. But I want to add something here, because I think the most honest conversations are the ones that hold complexity. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes, the person who got pushed out also played a role in the dynamic. Not a blameworthy role necessarily, but a role. Maybe the very qualities that made the group uncomfortable, that directness, that clarity, that refusal to perform, also made it hard for the group to build a bridge to you. Maybe there were moments where you could feel the tension and, rather than addressing it, you pulled back. Or you leaned in harder. Or you matched their coldness with distance of your own. This doesn't make what they did okay. Let me be absolutely clear. Nothing you did caused them to treat you that way. The group's behavior was a choice. A series of choices made by individuals who each had the option to show up differently. But I think real growth, the kind that comes from situations like this, isn't just about being vindicated. It's also about asking yourself honestly, what did I learn? What do I understand about my own patterns now that I didn't understand then? Because here's the thing about someone seeing the truth about what the group did, that's their growth. Your growth is something separate. Yours happened in the quiet, in the long nights of questioning yourself, in the painstaking work of rebuilding your self-concept from the ground up, in learning to trust your own perception again after it was systematically undermined. That growth, nobody can take it from you. And the version of you that comes out of that process, the one who has been through the fire and came back carrying something hard-won and real, that person is fundamentally different from who you were when you walked in. Not better in some abstract, toxic positivity sense. Not everything happens for a reason, just more real, more solid, more certain of what you know and more willing to trust what you see. So let's bring this all together. What we've walked through today is a pretty complete picture of a specific kind of human experience that is far more common than people talk about. A group organized around a social nucleus builds a narrative about an individual. That narrative spreads through confirmation bias and social trust. The individual, confused, in pain, their perceptions being systematically invalidated, eventually removes themselves, and they carry that decision like a weight, often questioning whether they made the right call, often wondering if they were the problem after all. Meanwhile, the group continues. The dynamic that produced your exclusion doesn't disappear with you, it simply finds new expressions, new targets, new friction points, and as those new situations unfold, some people within the group begin to see the machinery clearly for the first time. The truth surfaces. And when it does, it doesn't just vindicate you, it reframes the entire story. The qualities that were held against you become the qualities that, in retrospect, the clearest-eyed people in that group recognize as strengths. Your absence is felt not as relief, or not only as relief, but as a kind of quiet loss. A loss of something real that was never properly valued while it was there. And you, on the outside, doing the work of rebuilding, you might not even know any of this is happening. You're just living your life. Growing, healing, figuring out who you are now on the other side of that experience. But somewhere, Someone is looking back and beginning to understand what actually happened. And what that means is the record is being corrected, even if you never officially get to see the paperwork. Here's the thing I keep coming back to, and I want to leave you with this. We spend so much time trying to be understood in the moment. We want people to see us clearly right now. We want the vindication to come while we're still in the room. And when it doesn't, when we have to leave while the story is still unfair, it feels like a permanent injustice. But truth, I've come to believe, doesn't operate on our timeline. Truth is patient in a way that human beings rarely are. It doesn't rush to announce itself. It doesn't need an audience or a stage. It just waits. And while it's waiting, it's doing work beneath the surface that we can't always see. The person who was at the center of building the case against you. They know things now that they may never be able to say out loud. The people who went along with it, they have quiet moments where they're honest with themselves in ways they never are in public. And the space you left behind, the silence where your presence used to be, that silence says things that words never quite could. You were not wrong. You were not too much. You were not the problem. You were a person who deserved to be in a room full of people who could handle your full, real, unedited presence. And when you weren't in that room, you made the hardest call. You left to go find it. I hope you're finding it. I hope that the quiet on the other side of all that noise is starting to feel less like exile and more like arrival. And I hope that when someone tells you, finally, that they understand what happened, that you receive it not as the thing you needed to be okay, but as a quiet confirmation of something you already knew deep down. You were right. You're going to be all right. Okay. Before you go, I want to ask you something, and I genuinely want to know. Has there ever been a moment, maybe recently, maybe years ago, where you removed yourself from a situation, a group, a relationship, and you were made to feel like you were the one who gave up? But deep down you knew that leaving was the most courageous thing you could have done? And has anyone from that same situation ever come back and shown you, even in a small way, that they finally understood? Drop that story in the comments, or even just a piece of it. Because I think sometimes the most healing thing isn't a video. It's realizing you're not the only one who's lived through something like this. These stories deserve to be heard. And the people who've lived them, they deserve to know they were never alone. I'll see you in the next one.